everybody. Welcome to CANNAfact Friday Live. So excited to be here today. We survived another work week, but for me, it was not so grueling. I just got back from Jamaica last night and it was amazing. If you haven't been, definitely go check it out. This is CANNAfact Friday Live. If you haven't joined us before, this is a show where David and I share stats and facts pulled from real cannabis consumers, talking about trends and trying to make sense of what's happening in this dynamic market. My name is Adriana Hemans. I'm the VP of Demand at ISA, which is a insights firm based in Los Angeles, California. And I'm joined by my co-host, David Palaschuk, who is the author of the first and best-selling book on branding for cannabis, Branding Bud, the Commercialization of Cannabis. Welcome, David.
Yaman, welcome back from Jamaica. A week in Jamaica. Welcome back.
I know, I'm so lucky.
That's right.
I missed doing CANNAfact Friday Live last week, though.
It's true. And last week was actually the 4th of July weekend. So I'm sure everybody was out doing their thing. So here we are. A little rusty, and back after 2 weeks. But I'm excited to kick off our show and do what we normally do. We've got a great guest today, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But basically, as you said, we're here every Friday. We take data that's real and we contextualize it, because one data point or one soundbite just never is enough. As you start to get more data and more information and contextualize the information, then you kind of know what you're talking about. And in our industry, that changes all the time. So it's good to speak with you. It's good to use real data and talk about it. And it's good to participate with the folks that listen in and chat with us. And that's always great to participate with real people about real data. So that said, Adriana and I often come together. We talk about this. She's really comes from the data and insights world. I come from the branding side of things. And together, we've found a wonderful spot in the cannabis industry. So that said, we'd like to just say, please participate with us. We have a chat in the right-hand side. For the folks that come with us every week, you know where it is. And for the new folks, please feel free to participate and join us as we talk about cannabis and cannabis data. Mm-hmm. So with that, that's really where we are. You want to introduce our guest?
I sure do. So joining us today is Thomas Winstanley, who is the CMO of Wellness Theory, which is a brand based on the East Coast. It's both a medical and adult use brand. They have dispensaries in Massachusetts and Maine. They have a cultivation arm of their business. They have an extraction lab. They manufacture infused products. Thomas is extremely knowledgeable about all of these things. And today we're going to focus on wellness specifically and how cannabis products fit into people's lives as they're looking for therapeutic benefits. I should also mention that Wellness Theory focuses on small batch craft cannabis and sustainable techniques. Welcome,
Indeed.
Thomas.
Hello, Thomas. And before we bring him on, guess what?
What?
A week in Jamaica. I could see it already. It's Theory Wellness, not Wellness Theory.
Oh, geez, I am rusty.
Let's bring Thomas out.
Hey, y'all. Great to be here.
Hello, Thomas. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on.
Right on. See, I need a week in Jamaica is what I need.
I think we all do after the events that we're seeing these days.
Yeah, everything is all flipped upside down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, welcome. I'm glad you're with us today.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. And just before we get started, tell us where you are, just to put a location.
Sure. Yeah, I'm actually in the Theory Wellness marketing department in Western Massachusetts, where this location is about 30 miles north from our first adult use store, which was the 6th recreational dispensary in Massachusetts. And I've been with Theory now for going on 4 years this month, which has been really, really exciting. And during that time, we've gone from 2 stores to 6 stores. We became an MSO back in October when we moved up into Maine. We were there for the first day of adult use sales there. And we're privately owned, which is different, I think, a little bit of an oxymoron for privately owned MSOs. So We've been really kind of fighting and cutting our teeth on the East Coast, and we've get to be vertically integrated, which gives us a lot of different range in terms of supply chain, controlling our products. And for me as a marketer, it's a dream come true to be able to work on packaging design, retail, R&D, and all of the good stuff that comes with being a marketer in a vertically integrated company.
Mm-hmm. We love having
Great.
marketing people on the show because they definitely have a sense of like, they want to get creative. They want to know who the consumer is. They want to ask these hard hitting questions about what the market is really doing. So we're going to have fun today. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to jump in and share a little stat and we'll do our typical
Sure.
guessing game. Does that sound good?
Let's do
Sounds
it.
good to me.
Let's do it. Let's kick it off. And as David mentioned, please participate if you feel like it and put your guesses in the chat. We're doing a little game called CANNAfact or CANNAfiction. And you're guessing whether this stat is CANNAfact or CANNAfiction, true or false. Less than 25% of cannabis consumers indicated that recyclable or reusable packaging is an important factor when selecting products. And I should mention too that this was from a survey that was completed in November 2020 with 1,000 responses. Interesting question. I feel like it's sort of something that's coming more into the forefront every year. People are asking for sustainability. They care about sustainability. And of course, that would probably apply to cannabis consumers as well. Without giving too much away.
You know, I'm I'm curious too. You know, I know that some of the research I've seen has been very high that cannabis consumers are really interested in recyclable and reusable products, but I often wonder how that translates into the purchase. Um, you know, we all talk about it, but do we actually live it? And and I think perhaps we're getting there. That's really, you know, I often talk about how, you know, in today's time, brands are really the things we buy into and the things we believe. So we kind of act upon those things. Thomas, what's your sense of that? And in terms of how important recyclable, reusable packaging is?
I think it's definitely gaining in importance. I think early on, with the onset of child safe packaging, there were very few mechanisms out there and packaging solutions that could be sustainable or recyclable because they required some elements of plastic, or which is pretty much the path of least resistance. I think as we start to see the maturity of the industry start to grow, we're seeing provisions in new states around sustainable packaging requirements. And we're seeing vendors who are now bringing new solutions into the market, from compostable to biodegradable. And so I think certainly there's an awareness that is growing around sustainable packaging. And I think some of those solutions are really coming to the table, which is exciting to see. And it's something we're always on the lookout for too, to make sure that there is a viable and better mousetrap, if you will.
Hmm. You know, it's interesting. I think a lot of the brands I've worked with here on the West Coast have gone to, one, straight up, typically reusable or recyclable packaging
Hmm.
is more expensive.
Yeah.
But a lot of the solution has become sometimes collectible, you know, where it's really meant to be reused or collected more than it is
Hmm.
recycled. But you know, I see that Christian Gray had asked, how would a consumer actually know that a package is recyclable or reusable? I would, I mean, I've seen it certainly here on the West Coast, but you know, when a brand has probably a number of its, you know, pillars based on an ethos of you know, sustainability and those types of things, that they would call it out. I've seen a number of brands call out their packaging as recyclable or reusable, literally right on their package. I've seen other vape cart companies offer up uh, recyclable bins where people can actually come back and get a discount
Hmm.
on cartridges if they bring that in. Um,
Yeah, Kylie Halpern, who we had on the show, Dose of Chill, she does recyclable vapes. And also, I think like if you see a beautiful package or jar, you know, oh, I want to save this and use it for something else and like remember that experience. I just want to call out that Charlene guessed true, and I want to say welcome back to Charlene. She's been with us a few times here on CANNAfact Friday. And we also had a couple more guesses. Christian Gray guessed true, and Sharon Cooper guessed hopefully false. Oh, and I should mention too, this is from a nationwide survey. So not just East Coast folks, but everyone across the US who consumes cannabis could answer.
So before we get to that answer, we always ask our guests, Thomas, do you think it's less than 25% of cannabis consumers?
I would probably say that it's true, less than 25%.
Okay, all right. Well, we still don't have our sound effects yet. We're working on those. The drummer hasn't come back yet, but if he or she were here, we'd have a drum roll right now. So should we go to the answer?
Let's do it. It was CANNAfiction. It was actually a lot higher than 25%. 47% that recyclable or reusable packaging is important to them. So yeah, we're seeing even more evidence of this shift in mindset, I think. And probably it's like more higher, I would say, among cannabis consumers than general consumers, just because these are folks who are a little bit wellness driven, interested in health, and that would extend to the health of the environment as well, I would think.
Yeah, one would think. And again, I also I'm curious about the aspirational component here versus the traction. Like people really go out of their way. They look for products that are sustainable or recyclable. They spend the extra money. I just saw a product the other day it was wonderful flower. It was a quarter, but it was about $15 more. And when I asked why, it was because of the recycled jars, because some of the charity work that the company does. So it was just interesting to see. And I had asked, how many people are willing to spend that extra $15? But there's some, but I think people want it, but where the rubber hits the road is a different story. That's my gut.
It reminds me too of David, the point that you have made in the past about the evolution of marketing and branding, and where we are today is we want to associate with a brand that shares our values.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a really strong way to communicate that.
Yep. Putting your money where your mouth is something new.
And it's funny because this is actually one of those conversations where you never put your pen down when it comes to finding packaging solutions. And a lot of the time we're so close with our vendors that we're always asking them, we've been using this, is there a better alternative? Or we have this box, are you working on anything that's, takes us a little bit further in terms of sustainability? And to Adriana's point earlier too, about or to Christian's point, how do people know whether stuff is recyclable or anything like that? I mean, we actually will put it on bags or any of our products that if there is a way to recyclable, here it is, or here's how this works. And one thing that we're really big on is we sell a lot of beverages. We have a sub brand called High Five. We use these can pack lids basically that hold 4-packs together. Same thing you see in, beer, craft beer, etc. There's not a recycling program for those in Massachusetts, but we partnered with a group who actually collects them, takes them to go get recycled, and we are collection centers at our Theory Wellness stores to receive those can pack lids, to then take them to a certified recycler who's out of state. And that's the kind of stuff that we really like to do, because even if we don't have a solution in place, we try to bridge the gap in terms of setting the expectation with the consumer that, we're trying our best to get there. And when we see an opportunity, whether it's going from a plastic jar to a glass jar, or from a plastic mechanism to a paper mechanism that still meets child safety requirements, 9 times out of 10, we're going to make that jump, unless there's a very, very large exorbitant cost implication that, again, gets passed on to a consumer. That's a really hard, when you're running a really fine margin with what we're up against, you really have to be very conscious about which decisions you're making. And now I think more than ever, I think a lot of cannabis companies would agree, we're seeing a lot more domestic packaging solutions coming into the fold, which is great. because a lot of stuff that you order overseas from China, you have high freight costs, you have a very large environmental footprint, even though you have a lower cost per unit. There is this, I think there's a very large shift happening as we speak around packaging solutions. And certainly for us, it's something that once you design something, you're almost already looking towards the next medium for that product to go into, because there is such a quick evolution in the space around packaging. That creates more work for us, but we're all game. We're game for it because we think it's a net positive for the industry as a whole.
It's really refreshing to hear you've thought through that whole step-by-step process.
Yeah. So how does that play into how does packaging play into the overall strategy of the Theory Wellness brand?
That's a great question. So, for us, because we are vertically integrated, part of my philosophy and the greater kind of organization's philosophy is trying to make sure that the Theory brand feels consistent across all touch points, whether it's a product, a store, a web experience. And we take a lot of discipline to our branding, as well as our product choices, as well as our packaging choices. And so when you take our portfolio of products and you line them up with one another, you'll see that there's a very clear delineation and architecture for how these products are actually designed and laid out. And it's all based on creating that, an essence of the brand that we really feel that we want to bring forward. And so when we look at the design of all of our packaging, we're kind of keeping a lot of variables in play, and we have a little bit of a structure that we're willing to bend on. But for the most part, what we really want to make sure of is that when you see a Theory product, it's a Theory product. And that Theory product also has to meet a certain criteria of innovation. If we're going to make it, we have to make sure that it's a quality product. The packaging has to be quality. And one of the first questions I had in my interview with, the Theory team before I came on board was, where do you see Theory going? Where does Theory want to be in the marketplace? And they said, we're not really sure because we're kind of learning into this, but we want to remove the stigma of cannabis. And that really rang true for me in the sense that I grew up always hiding cannabis in an old cigar box underneath my bed. And it was always put it as far away from anybody else's eyes as you can. But what I realized in that meeting is I said, I really want to be able to design cannabis products that you can put next to a bottle of wine or leave out on a counter, and it looks like it fits in place. And I think that kind of approach to some of our packaging design and our aesthetic has led us into the space where we are today, where our packaging doesn't look like it's a scream out loud, this is cannabis, but it's a product that can fit into a lot of different lifestyles, and it doesn't jump out and scream, over designed or over packaged or trying to be something it's not. And that whole ecosystem comes from a lot of discipline in terms of how do we want this brand to really to resonate in the markets that we're in.
It sounds like you really put a lot of thought into what your packaging is communicating, which is really refreshing. And to your point about people being able to display it, I think there's definitely a movement among people who are kind of curious and are interested in getting into the market, but they're not necessarily the ones who grew up with the cigar box under their bed or the Altoids box under their bed. So for them, it's not accessible. They want something that communicates that it's accessible, that it's natural, that it's something that they can trust. So I'm just curious, without asking you directly to talk shit about any other brands, do you think that overall people are doing a good job of communicating their values or making the packaging accessible to new entrants?
I think brands are learning. And I think one takeaway that I've seen more so in the last year by comparison to the previous 3 years is that brand is becoming a variable that it didn't have as much resonance with the consumer as it does today. And I think the added emphasis on what does a brand mean and what does it stand for is starting to really become a driver for success for brands. And I don't think everybody does it well. I think, one thing that's always interesting is when I talk to other brands is sometimes their marketing team is one person, or they have limited resources, or the marketing is one of the last things that they consider. And I think for me, that's a really dangerous place to be as a cannabis brand. For us, we always knew, as one of the first on the East Coast, we had a lot of first impressions with people who were discovering legal cannabis. And we knew in that one experience with our brand, we had to get it right. And we really wanted to win those people over who were thinking that, oh, it's going to be, like some sketchy thing, and that it was going to be, unrefined. And we really wanted to work on reversing that stereotype. And brand actually does go a very long way in creating the efficacy for the industry as a whole. And so I think from our perspective and mine, I don't know that all brands are doing that quite as well as they could be. But I think we're going to see a lot more focus and emphasis on brand doing that heavy lifting within the industry. But it's going to take some time. But we're doing our part, and I think hopefully I think there are a lot of brands who are starting to figure it out, that equation out, and it'll be good to see as that the industry matures more in that area.
Yeah, I just want to call out that Christian posted a link to a Weed Maps article.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Christian.
Theory Wellness made the list. You heard it here first.
So
Yeah.
indeed, you're doing your part.
I mean, we're trying. I mean, and here's the thing, it's really hard. So, and I think that's the other thing is that everybody, I think, looks at sustainability and says, oh, just be sustainable. And there is so much that goes into the consideration of how to do that well and to not cut corners. And you have to really invest and be thoughtful about it because, people are operating with really thin margins, 280E, the tax brackets make it really, really hard to create profitability. Sustainability, unfortunately, is expensive. And to know how to do it in a way that is sustainable economically, but also environmentally is critical. And from day one, we've always been very conscious about where we want our role in the cannabis industry to be. And we've always wanted to try to at least do our part within the reach that we can. And that's everything from packaging to bringing on green technologies and bartering electricity from green grids. And even to, we have one of the first outdoor East Coast cannabis farms, just to lessen the burden of the environmental impact of cannabis cultivation. And that's really within the DNA of theory. And I think that's kind of where a lot of this stems from in terms of our goals with packaging and trying to show that it's possible. But it's just not easy, I think, for everybody, if that makes sense.
It does. And what's interesting too is because you're vertically integrated, you have the opportunity, you have more consumer touch points. So you really have, well, I'll say you have the opportunity to either drive everything home and hit the grand slam with all the touch points you have, or you have the opportunity to flop if you don't do it well. It's a double-edged sword, but obviously, as Christian called out and Weed Maps called out, you're doing it right. Should we jump into, since wellness is the last name in the company's name, should we jump into the next fact, which is related to wellness?
Let's do it.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we bring that up? So this is a Canna choice. Which of the following exercises is the most popular among cannabis consumers for pairing with cannabis? Is it A, running, B, strength training or circuit training, C, hiking, D, yoga or Pilates? And Thomas, I know you're really into wellness and into activity when it comes to pairing with cannabis. I'm curious to get not only our listeners' perspective on this, but yours, and also see if there's any stereotypes that we could break here.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been a cannabis user for at this point more than half of my life, and I've also been an athlete for for as long as I can remember, and I've always been somebody who finds that cannabis helps both all stages of exercise, whether it's a pre-workout, during workout, and even a post-workout. There are different types of cannabis that can aid in each of those kind of different types of approaches to exercise. And for me personally, I've always really, really enjoyed athletics, the comparison or the combining of cannabis and a lot of cardio exercise. So I'm a big runner, and I can really get into the right tempo for a speed run using cannabis faster than if I wasn't. And on the recovery side too, I find there's so many different ways that whether it's a CBD or a CBD and THC combination of a topical or an edible or even a drink, that helps that recovery process. And what's funny is that sometimes when I share this with people, they look at me like I am crazy. And they always say, well, I could never do that. And, maybe it's not for everybody. But I do think there is a certain level, that for me personally helps me get into that flow state. If I'm hitting tennis balls, I stop thinking about my forehand and how I'm swinging and if my timing is right. When I'm running, I can get into that right rhythm, at mile 4 versus at mile 8 if I'm doing a half marathon. And so I think it's exciting to see this breakdown of these walls with cannabis and exercise. And I think we're starting to see a much broader adoption, especially with, the NFL reducing some of their, testing around cannabis policy. And I'd like to see more of it too. I think if alcohol companies can sponsor athletes, so should cannabis companies. And I think there's a lot of efficacy between, cannabis and exercise that that's an area of focus that I'm really interested in. And I think Theory Wellness is probably going to do some fun stuff based on some of the ideas that I've had, some of the wild ideas that I've had in terms of fusing the two together and really breaking down some of those walls.
Ooh, I want to hear some of those wild ideas.
Yeah,
That sounds
you're gonna have to wait, Adriana.
fun.
90% of the ideas we come up with are terrible. It's the 5% that aren't so bad, the 4% that are kind of okay, and then the 1% that we actually move forward with. So
Yeah, then
hopefully
you have to
soon
turn
you'll see
around and
something.
test it and see which ones are good and then roll them out to market.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely.
It's funny. I'm missing on this choice, I must say. E would be skateboarding because that seems to be a perfect match, and then F probably all of the above.
Yeah, we'll have to refield this one again. We did have other answer choices that we didn't show here just because we didn't want to just inundate people with a huge long list. So we wanted to keep it to like the basic, classic 4 multiple choice answers. But these were the ones that we thought would be the ones that would come to mind first that people would be puzzling over.
And it's interesting too. I think that probably has a lot to do with the geographic location. Probably a lot of regionality to that. Certainly, everybody except me hikes in the Pacific Northwest, but I do play tennis.
There we
go. Note to self: go on a hike. Anyway. Yeah, so that's interesting. Well, let's get to the answer, shall we? I see that.
Wait,
Christian,
before we do, I just want to call
yes.
out that this poll was done May
Yes.
5th, 2022. It was wrapped up it was fielded May 5th, 2022. Gosh, I'm really getting rusty. Wrapped up May 25th, 2022 with 422 completes nationwide.
Right. So that's very, very recent.
Very recent.
And again, even the seasonality too, right? If that perhaps was taken in the middle of winter, it might have gotten different responses as well. But anyway, who's ready for the answer, or should we wait for a few more? I see swimming is in there. Christian's taking some liberties here. I don't think.
I'll have to message you later with the swimming answer, Christian.
And the answer is, drum roll please, thank you. It's hiking, which again, living in the Pacific Northwest does not seems to fit right in, actually, and is not surprising. Thomas, you're on the East Coast. What are your thoughts on that?
I was going to say sea hiking myself. I spent time, I moved from New York to Laramie, Wyoming with my wife, and I spent a lot of time going down to Colorado. And as an East Coast cannabis lover, I spent a lot of time consuming Durban Poison, high in THCV, a very energetic, uplifting, and really, really fun, engaging strain. And hiking is probably one of the best activities, and especially for somebody who is that person who's not sure about cannabis and exercise, hiking's a really nice low barrier for entry to try mixing cannabis with something that's going to have a little bit more of the, higher cardio output without being extraneous on trying to be too coordinated or having to manage yourself through something that's more nuanced, like a running, circuit training, or a yoga. And the hiking out west is just incredible for obvious reasons.
I also
And
feel like it's a little less competitive too. If
Yes.
you're like trying to
Yeah.
outperform the people that you're with, you might want to pick something like hiking where there's no finish line involved.
Oh yeah.
it's just getting back to the trailhead, right?
Yeah. Right.
But that's interesting too, Thomas, because you so to speak just paired a strain or a cultivar with an activity, which I think is really intriguing when you think about it. And
Hmm.
certainly Durban poison being one of my favorites, so I can appreciate that too.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, and it's something that we take a lot of time at Theory to make sure that people are understanding the efficacy and the differentiation between strains, because we want to make sure that cannabis for us in a lot of ways is a complement to whatever you're doing. It should add value. It should never be the focal point of what you're doing. And so, in the same way that you don't go to a bar to get, to get really, really drunk, you go to a bar to hang out with people and to socialize, and alcohol happens to be there to add to that experience. It's the same thing with cannabis. And I love this whole part of cannabis that is starting to emerge where finding pairings of certain strains and terpene profiles with activities. If I'm not going to give Durban poison to somebody who doesn't use a lot of cannabis because I think that's going to be too exhilarating and racy and cerebral. But if I'm having a dinner party and I have a really good, red wine, I'll try to find a strain that will match nicely with the red wine and also be something that everybody can enjoy, that's not going to be really high testing, but will give you just a taste of an expression of something, whether it's a 1-to-1 or it's a lower testing strain or something that's not going to turn people into vegetables at a dinner party. And so that's part of what I really love about kind of where cannabis is going, is this more nuanced approach to pairing and finding the right strains for the right people to match the right situation and circumstance.
Right. Well, I for one just want to call out, I love vegetables for dinner. So I just want to point that
There
out.
you go.
So tell us, obviously the name of the company is Theory Wellness, but would you talk a little about
Yeah.
wellness and how perhaps you even discovered wellness as a category or a segment, and then how you not only um, service that segment, but how do you connect with those customers interested in, air quotes, wellness?
Yeah. So we have an interesting relationship to obviously we're called Theory Wellness. So wellness has been a pillar and a foundation for us as a company. A lot of that comes back to when the company started in 2015. Massachusetts was a medical only state at that time. And our entry into the cannabis market was for medical patients. And the first 2 years to 2 to 3 years, I should say, we're focused on patients. And patients are still the heart of our company. We started as a medical cannabis company, and we are still very active in the Massachusetts medical space. And so we realized very early on that there was a very strong efficacy tied to the cannabis plant. And one of our founders, his father, had an injury and was on opiates, and cannabis was actually something that pulled him away from using a lot of prescription drugs. And that was part of a driver for where Theory came from in the first place. And so we have a personal correlation with one of our founders, but I think more broadly speaking, we're really, really focused on helping to create alternative treatment methods and secondary treatment methods, and to really work in terms of building a better understanding for how cannabis can be a part of a social fabric, not just on the recreational side, but as a therapeutic treatment. And we're really, really firm on the fact that whether you're a 40-year cannabis smoking veteran who knows everything about cannabis, and there are products for those folks, but almost more importantly, if you're somebody who's never used cannabis, or you come to us and you say, I have an issue with sleep, or I have arthritis and my joints, swell, we'll work with you to find products that will help alleviate or mitigate some of the pressures or the stressors in the physicality of your lifestyle. And part of our vertically integrated approach is that we've evolved a product catalog to reach a very broad swath of consumers and to provide products that will meet different ailments along the way. And so that mentality is one of the best, because we didn't come into the market saying we're going to just make recreational products that are just going to be, all purely fun. And don't get me wrong, there is a part of our segment that is that. But we also want to make sure, though, that part of cannabis, to have legitimacy, you have got to show efficacy. And without efficacy, it's very hard to create that sense of a real legitimacy, both from a medical standpoint as well as from a social standpoint. And that line is something that we hold self-evident in everything we do today, even still. And so wellness is is in our name, but also cannabis is a wellness product, and it can be a wellness product. And I think it's my favorite days are when people come in and you have the 87-year-old lady who says, my great grandson told me I should come to you guys because you guys may be able to help me stay asleep at night. What do I take? And then seeing one of our consultants who's 22 years old saying, well, I actually really think you should try this 1-to-1 chew, eat this an hour before bedtime, see how it goes. If it doesn't work, start with half, go full on the next night. And then having that person come back and say, hey, I love those edibles. And when we do surveying of our consumers, to hear that first line feedback where we can quantify that we are helping segments who are looking for quality of life improvements via cannabis. That's once in a lifetime, and one of the reasons why I think we're all in this industry, and we hold very true to that wherever we can in our operation.
I love that you have those one-to-one connections with your customers too. I think that that's so important, especially as a marketing person, right? Understand, like hearing those stories really brings it to life, what people are looking for and what they're using it for and how it fits into their life. We talked a little bit about like CANNACurious, new people coming in, the 87-year-old woman who wants to fall asleep. Aside from the making things accessible and making things consistent and reliable, is there another way that you signal through your marketing and branding that some products are for new consumers and some maybe are for more experienced consumers?
Very much so. I mean, or at least I would like to say we try to, and we attempt to build those bridges. I think for one, we let our audience guide us in a lot of ways. So we do a lot of surveying of our customers, as I mentioned, where we'll ask for feedback. If we launch a new product, a lot of times, a consumer, if they're buying a first generation of a product or a beta of a product, we'll send an email right afterwards that is automated that says, give us your feedback on this. Did this product meet the standards you were looking for? Was the efficacy what you expected? Does it taste good? Did it, kind of provide the needs, did it meet your needs in terms of a new product? And we also, part of my responsibilities, I actually oversee our customer service teams. And one of the reasons for doing so is it's incredibly important that if somebody reaches out with a question about cannabis, that there's somebody on the other end of the line to answer that question. And we do things like set up white glove consultations with consumers via video conferences to take them almost through like a decision tree to help, based on what their intended outcomes are, to pair products with what they're looking for. We also, in terms of the development of these products, we talk about who is the intended audience for this product, how may this help somebody, and then also how do we position this product? Are we positioning this product as a therapeutic product? Are we positioning this product as a general market product? We have some of these conversations, and if a consumer reaches out and says, I had a really bad time with this, we have a dialogue with them to see where we had gaps, and everything from our evergreen descriptions of every product to the very intensive product development research that I get to do in quantifying trends around a product category. We really try to bring as much into the forefront as we can. And we don't rush people to our stores. COVID was really hard because everything went pre-order and online. We lost a little bit of that communication, that one-to-one conversation side. All of our consultants are highly trained to have a thorough conversation to make sure that consumers are getting exactly what they're looking for. And if they don't get what they're looking for, we want to know why and what the gap is that we can then get better. Our biggest competitor, we always say, is ourselves. We're always competing not with everybody else, but with ourselves internally to build a better operation and to, again, bring a lot of people into the fold, those CANNAcurious, because this is not the cannabis you remember from 20 years ago. this is a very new age, and we want to put the best foot forward in terms of setting those expectations.
Right. It's interesting.
Go ahead.
Sorry, it's interesting too, because as you just said, there's different form factors as well. So people aren't even, used to what they might have been in the past. But it's just interesting to see that, how the form factors affect their expectations. Sorry, Adriana.
No, it's all good. I was going to segue into a conversation about marketing and also about gender and product development, since Thomas just brought that up. And I think like we could show this next stat, which is related to that, like how men and women may or may not be using cannabis differently than each other, especially related to wellness. So if we want to throw that up, we will get to the next one. This is CANNAfact or CANNAfiction. And the stat is men are more likely than women to consume cannabis as part of their post-workout regimen. And while people are guessing and noodling it out, I'm curious to hear from Thomas if you do have a gender component to your marketing strategy, or if your products are mostly gender neutral.
It's a good question. I would say for the most part, we try to be very much agnostic of gender divides in terms of product development. We're not making anything in terms of gender specific audiences. I think globally for us, we want to make products that are accessible. It doesn't matter who you are. We want to make sure that we're providing products that to any range of a consumer, whether you're a veteran or you're a novice, we want to build the gap to show what the legal cannabis industry can provide. And so, what I see from our data is that our sales lean 60% male, 40% female. Those are nice numbers to know, but it's not necessarily incumbent on how we're kind of coursing our strategy moving forward. And I think over time, those numbers will be really interesting to watch because we're still so early. I mean, Theory has really only been a brand for 5 to 7 years. We are in the infancy of hopefully what will be a very long run. And we always remind ourselves of that we're very much in a learning phase. We're in a discovery phase. And the best way that we can grow is to be open to that data, learn from that data, and help leverage it to improve the quality of our operations.
Wow.
Well said. Thanks for guessing, Charlene. Charlene guessed fact.
Yes, she did. And thank you for the folks that have chimed in along the way on the side. We appreciate that. And Aaron, for your smiley face, if you're still there, I appreciate that early on. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insight is really incredible. Your experience in the real world and your ability to take that knowledge into the cannabis industry is key and crucial and critical to the success of our industry. So I thank you for that. We need more people like you in the industry, that are thoughtful and really are respectful of the plant, but also understand business. And it's rare to find people that can bridge that gap. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
And if you're curious what the answer is,
yes. Sorry.
No, well, I appreciate you both for having me on, Adriana and David. This has been really, really fun. And, certainly I appreciate being able to share more about our operation. And the kudos means a lot coming from the both of you who are so well versed in this industry. And certainly by my own stance, we're trying to do the best we can. And it's always exciting. And, we hope that you check us out and learn more about us. And I appreciate you guys bringing me on to chat about things I love to talk about. So very much appreciated on a Friday.
Right on. Well, thank you. I'm well versed in the industry, but I can't make it through a PowerPoint presentation. So forgive me on that. The answer was before we say goodbye to Thomas.
CANNAfact.
What a CANNAfact. There we go. So men are more likely than women to consume cannabis as part of their post-workout regimen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Nice. We just wanted to leave you in a little bit of suspense, Thomas.
Yes. Bring him back to the next show to give him the answer.
There we go. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas.
check out Theory Wellness. Check out Thomas's LinkedIn page. Definitely follow us on LinkedIn to find out who our upcoming guests are. We have a lot more fun shows coming up throughout the rest of July and early August. So there's a link in the chat. Go ahead and follow us so you know what we have up our sleeve. And that is all we have for today. Our guest next week is Sarah Falvo from the ArcView Group. She'll be here talking about female entrepreneurs and the world of cannabis investing. And we're very excited to have her on. Also, just a super fun person. Love her energy. So join us next week.
Yeah. Thank you again for joining us today on CANNAfact Friday. We'll be back next week. Adriana, welcome back from Jamaica. Now it's back to work for you, right? So
this rusty brain is going to get back into gear, hopefully.
That's right. That's right. Well, you've shown me I definitely need to take a vacation or at least a hike. So thank you everybody for joining us. Please follow us and we'll see you again next Friday. Have a great weekend and a great week next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.